Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chairman Shimkus, Chairman Whitfield, ranking members Rush and Green, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify about President Obama's budget request for the Environmental Protection Agency. I just want to start to say that our thoughts and prayers are with the people of Japan this morning, and EPA, along with much of the federal government, stands ready to assist them and our own people as we see the ramifications of what's going on there. Congress enacted the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and America's other bedrock environmental protection laws on a broadly bipartisan basis. It did so to protect Americans' children and adults from pollution that otherwise would make their lives shorter, less healthy, and less prosperous. It did so to make the air and drinking water in America's communities clean enough to attract new employers. It did so to enable America's local governments to revitalize abandoned and polluted industrial sites. It did so to safeguard the pastime of America's 40 million anglers. It did so to protect the farms whose irrigation makes up a third of America's surface water, freshwater withdrawals. And it did so to preserve the livelihoods of fishermen in America's great waters, such as the Great Lakes, the Chesapeake Bay, and the Gulf of Mexico. Congress gave EPA the responsibility of implementing and enforcing those laws. Each year, Congress appropriates the money that makes EPA's implementation and enforcement work possible. As head of the EPA, I am accountable for squeezing every last drop of public health protection out of every dollar we are given. So I support the tough cuts in the President's proposed budget. But I am equally accountable for pointing out when cuts become detrimental to public health. Without adequate funding, EPA would be unable to implement or enforce the laws that protect Americans' health, livelihoods, and pastimes. Big polluters would flout legal restrictions on dumping contaminants into the air, into rivers, and onto the ground. Toxic plumes already underground would reach drinking water supplies because ongoing work to contain them would stop. There'd be no EPA grant money to fix or replace broken water treatment systems, and the standards EPA is set to establish for harmful air pollution from smokestacks and tailpipes would remain missing from a population of sources that is not static but growing. So if Congress slashes EPA funding, concentrations of harmful pollution would increase from current levels in the places Americans live, work, go to school, fish, hike, and hunt. The result would be more asthma attacks, more missed school days and work days, more heart attacks, more cancer cases, more premature deaths, and more polluted waters. Needless to say, then, I fervently request and deeply appreciate continued bipartisan support in Congress for funding the essential work that keeps American children and adults safe from uncontrolled amounts of harmful pollution being dumped into the water they drink and the air they breathe. Decreasing federal spending is no longer just a prudent choice, it is now an unavoidable necessity. Accordingly, President Obama has proposed to cut EPA's annual budget nearly 13%. That cut goes beyond eliminating redundancies. We have made difficult, even painful choices. We have done so, however, in a careful way that preserves EPA's ability to carry out its core responsibilities to protect the health and well-being of Americans' children, adults, and communities. You've been reviewing the budget request for more than 3 weeks, so I'll save the details for the question and answer period. Before turning to your questions, I will address Chairman Upton's bill to eliminate portions of the Clean Air Act. The most extreme parts of that bill remain unchanged since I testified about it a month ago. It still would presume to overrule the scientific community on the scientific finding that carbon pollution endangers Americans' health and well-being. Politicians overruling scientists on a scientific question. You might well be remembered more for that than for anything else you do. The bill still would block any Clean Air Act standards for greenhouse gas pollution from cars and trucks after 2016. Alone, the Department of Transportation's CAFE standards do not achieve nearly as much pollution reduction or oil savings as when they are backed up by the Clean Air Act's enforcement provisions. All told, nullifying this part of the Clean Air Act would forfeit many hundreds of millions of barrels of oil savings at a time when gas prices are rising yet again. I cannot for the life of me understand why you would vote to massively increase America's oil dependence. The Clean Air Act saves millions of American children and adults from the debilitating and expensive illnesses that occur when smokestacks and tailpipes dump unrestricted amounts of harmful pollution into the air we breathe. I respectfully ask this committee to think twice before gutting that landmark law. Thank you, Chairman. I look forward to your questions.